Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're on the Wise Ones on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. And today we have a powerhouse planned for the next 40 minutes. Morton has more things to talk about than I can even believe we could begin to cover. So we'll do our very best. I had a chance to chat with him just briefly before the show, plus a little bit of research. But Mark he has a PhD in early modern English literature. He loves food. He's written books on it, food culture, nonfiction, history, language, family, a lot of information on family. So please, Mark, join me and let's get started today.
Hi, Red. How are you doing?
Exceptionally well, as always.
Good. Can I ask, first of all, is Red your actual first name or is that a nickname?
It's a nickname, Red here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
My real name is Francis Michael O'Laughlin III.
Oh, okay.
My father and my grandfather were also named the same.
Oh, is that right?
Both called Red. Now I have a son, the fourth, who's also called Red, but he has no red hair.
Oh,
well, my daughter makes up for that. So she's
well, that's nice. I like that.
I want to jump in right away because it's something that's a passion of yours, and then We'll get into the rest of it. Adoption, older kids. You have a little bit of experience on that. So tell us, how did that happen, and what's been your experience?
Yeah, well, my experience with adoption actually even goes back to before my wife and I adopted our kids, because I grew up in a household in the prairies of Saskatchewan, Canada, and my parents had 6 birth children, and then they decided that they wanted to also adopt some children, and so that's what they did. They adopted 3 indigenous children. I think in the U.S., the term Indian is still used. In Canada, Indigenous or First Nations is probably more common. They're my brothers, and I love them just like everybody else, of course. One of my sisters also adopted children. When I asked my mom once why they had adopted children, her answer was so simple. It was profound. She said, "Well, because there was a need." And so when my wife and I got married, we thought, well, why don't we adopt children? There are children out there, tens, hundreds of thousands. Like I know that in Ontario, where I am right now, one of the largest, most populated provinces in Canada, that at any given moment, there are around 10,000 children who are looking to be adopted. So there's a huge need. We wanted to adopt older children, again, because of the need. Most people want to start with an infant, but there was is such a need. So we adopted them sort of in two pairs. The first pair, Brandon and Leica, were 8 and 10 when we adopted them. And then after a couple of years, we adopted twins, fraternal twins, Roxana and Matthew. They were both age 8 at the time. And that was about 17 years ago. So they have all moved into young adulthood. I think raising them was the most meaningful, profound, educational, hardest thing that my wife and I had ever done. But, you know, now that we look back on it, you know, we can certainly still remember and feel, you know, the highs, the really great moments. And of course, I think what happens too is some of the real challenges, you know, because humans are resilient, we can tend to forget about those and just focus on the positive things. So that's sort of a brief overview of my experience with adoption and adopting children.
We rarely have PhDs in early modern English literature. How did that happen?
Well, yeah, that's actually a good question, because it kind of epitomizes my life. Like when I was a kid, I never said to myself, I want to become this or that or this. I knew that I was good with language, that I liked words, but I didn't have a career. Like sometimes I think that young children now, too soon, they say, I'm going to be a dentist when I grow up, or I'm going to be an accountant, or whatever. I just let myself kind of drift around intentionally, trying to learn about different things. And so I did a BA and then an MA in English literature, just sort of literature in general. And then when it came time to do a PhD, I had no idea what author or what I wanted to focus on. But I went to a few presentations that different professors at the University of Toronto, that's where I was, were giving. And one professor in particular, his name was James Carscallon. And I loved his manner. I loved how he taught. It was just so intuitive. And I said to myself, I don't care what his specialties are. I want to work with this guy. So it turned out that he had, he passed away just a couple of years ago, that he had two specialties. One was Edmund Spenser, and who was a 16th century poet, same time as Shakespeare, roughly. But whereas Shakespeare, of course, was mostly dramatic, like theater, that's how we think of it now. Edmund Spenser was only wrote poetry, didn't publish any plays. And they lived in they existed in very, very different worlds. Shakespeare's world of theater would have been much more earthy than Spenser's world, which was much more sort of among the aristocracy. And then my supervisor's other specialty was Alice Munro, a Canadian short story writer who actually just passed away maybe 4 weeks ago or so. And she lived not far from where I am right now. And so it was between those two, Edmund Spenser or Alice Munro. And I thought, well, why not try Spenser? I've never heard anything about him. He's not often taught. And that's how I came up with what I ended up studying for, let's see, 6 or 7 years when I was doing my PhD. Kind of happenstance, really.
It's also rare that we submit our books for awards, that we, nonfiction, a particular genre, sci-fi, romance, whatever. But you almost won an award for Julia Child.
Yeah, that too was kind of, I mean, I feel very fortunate in my life, but at the same time, I think one has to be open to fortune. But what happened was, after I finished my PhD, I taught in the south of France for a while, which sounds great. But I grew up, as I said, on the prairies of Canada, totally flat. The farm where I lived was in the flattest part of the world, like seriously. And so living at the French Riviera with these highways running, around edges of mountains, I just couldn't stand it. So after about 8 months, I said, I have to leave. I have to go back to the prairies. So I left the French Riviera. So one day I was playing tennis. The next day I was in the middle of a blizzard in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It was quite a difference. Once I got to Winnipeg, I thought, well, I've always liked CBC Radio. That's Canada's national broadcaster, I guess kind of like NPR in the States. And so I pitched an idea to them, which was to talk about the origins of some words. And they thought, we'll try him out. So I wrote a show and broadcast it. It went well. I didn't really know what I was doing, but they were willing to kind of mentor me along. And so that became an ongoing show, a weekly show. And then it moved on to a national show in Canada. And so a publisher, once I sort of became known for that, a publisher actually reached out to me and said, you know, we like what you do on CBC. Would you consider writing a book about word origins? And I thought, sure, why not? What should I write about? And I thought, well, everybody likes food. And food, of course, is a very interesting topic, a very interesting body of vocabulary, because we get food words from all over the place. Probably almost every language, well, not every, but hundreds of different languages. And so I wrote a book about food words. It was called Cupboard Love, a Dictionary of Culinary Curiosities. And yeah, it was then one of 3 nominees for a Julia Child Award in the category of technical reference. Yeah, that's it. And it didn't win. I think the one that won in that category, this is back in 1996, I think it was nominated. The one that won was a sort of a history and a cultural study of Southwestern food culture in the United States. But yeah, it was an honor to be nominated. And I don't know why, but I regret this. You know, I don't regret a lot of things in life, but I do regret not going to the award ceremony, because I could have met Julia Child. But I can't remember why I didn't. Maybe I was doing something else. But I sure wish that I had done that, because she too, you know, I seem to be talking about a lot of people who have passed away, but she passed away some years ago as well. And she was just such a force, just such an amazing person in the world of food, not just in terms of cooking, but also in terms of supporting the study of food and of food culture.
I'll pass on a little phrase that I use periodically when I'm trying to tell people how flat it is here where I live in the Houston area.
Oh, yeah.
I say, the highest thing in sight's a curb.
Yeah. I've been to Houston. I liked it. I didn't actually get out of the city much, but yeah, in Saskatchewan, where I grew up, and maybe this is something that is said in lots of different places, but they say Saskatchewan is the one place where if your dog runs away, you can see it going away for 4 days.
Okay, I have not heard that one before. I like that. I like that one a lot, especially if it's a big dog.
Yeah.
Okay, but you did win an award for a nonfiction book. Which one was that?
Yeah, that was well. After I wrote Cupboard Love, the one about food origins, the publishers came back to me and said, "Well, it did quite well. It sold quite well. Got really, really good reviews." And they said, "Why don't you write another one?" And I thought, okay, I just have to come up with a topic. And I think initially I was thinking of sports words, but then I thought, well, not everybody likes sports, and I don't really know much about sports. I can't skate, you know, even though I'm Canadian. I can't do that. And so I thought, well, what else does almost everybody do or want to do? And so I ended up writing a book about the origins of words pertaining to love and sex. And that is the one that was the recipient of an award, a Canadian award called the Alexander Isbister Award. Alexander Isbister was one of the pioneers in the prairies, in Winnipeg specifically. I believe he was the founder of the Winnipeg Free Press, which is still the main daily newspaper in Winnipeg. And so there's an award named after him. This was the one book that I didn't tell my mother about. Because as you can imagine, some of the contents are pretty risque, you know, given the topic.
From a sexy perspective.
Yeah. But it was a lot of fun to research and a lot of fun to do interviews about. I should say too that, you know, my timing was very fortunate in the sense that I began to write these books just at the time that the Oxford English Dictionary, which of course is, well, I'm biased, but I think it would be fair to say it's the greatest dictionary in the world for any language. It is enormous. It's in its condensed form, I believe. It's 16 volumes, so it takes up about 4 feet on a shelf. It took 60, 70 years to complete. The person who began it, Murray, what's his first name? I can't remember. But he began working on it. Of course, this was long before the ages of computers. This was back in the early 20th century. And he only got to the very beginning of the letter B before he died. So that was taken on by others after that. Anyways, I guess my point is this, that it was around the time that I began to write about word origins that the Oxford English Dictionary became available in digital form on a DVD. And that meant that searches could be done with it that would now take, that could take seconds, whereas previously they would have either been impossible or would have taken hours and hours and hours to do searches. So I was very lucky to have that technology appear just at the right time.
It's interesting. You do a lot of study on those kinds of things, word origins, and a word that is common in, say, part of Europe kind of has a similar deal. But then you get over to the Asian country, they're nowhere close. And then you get even parts of Europe where Hungary is totally different than Finland is totally different than, and so it just seems like there's little places where that dug in and stayed and didn't get shared anywhere. Any little stories you want to share about your findings on that?
Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, all languages evolve over time, of course. Once printing was invented, I mean, that had an impact on language evolution because to some extent it kind of stabilized things. Before that, language just changed. And I've often heard that a person could understand their grandmother and their grandmother could understand their grandmother, but the first person would not be able to understand their great grandmother because the accent and words would have shifted so much. That isn't the case anymore, I think, because, we have films from, beginning part of the 20th century. So we still know how people sounded. But as language disperses, as, colonization occurred through history, especially I'm thinking with regard to England, that's the place that I know most about. Language was planted and then it changed, or in some cases didn't change. So I believe that in Newfoundland, the east coast of Canada, the English that is spoken there, it can be very, very different. Like I have great difficulty understanding them not because it changed, but because it didn't change. So I've read that the English that is spoken in Newfoundland is probably more similar to how Shakespeare and his contemporaries spoke the language than the people in England right now. So in England, it continued to evolve and change, but in other places like Newfoundland, it kind of just stayed more or less the way it was. So who knows why? I mean, some things, there's always reasons behind language change, but sometimes those reasons are just beyond our figuring out.
And even at the same time today, the same words, phrases, spoken with an Irish accent, a Scottish accent, a Welsh accent, an English accent, Australian,
Singapore has a very, Singapore also, there's an English there, which they call Singlish, because it's still English, it's a dialect of English, but it is very influenced by other languages that were there, like even Portuguese, Malay, other languages that are native to that part of the world. And Singlish is very, very different.
I've been to a number of different places. I love listening to the local languages and what I call Tourista language. So you can, and I was just outside of Lisbon. I'm listening to the Portuguese radio, and it sounded like Spanish being spoken with a Russian accent.
Yeah.
And as best I tried, I had difficulty. And same thing in Budapest. Yeah. As much as I could, okay, here's what it says, but that's not what I'm saying. But I think I'm saying that. But anyway, it's interesting, and those experiences are, I find, to be to me, amazing, because you're able to communicate with somebody that literally doesn't speak your language, but
Yep.
between hand signals and whatever, nowadays you just hold a phone and they read it,
Yeah.
and so it makes it a whole lot easier. But I can
Yeah.
imagine how some of the travelers from years ago moving across vast distances that
Yep.
totally different. So, but you have a book that covers a lot of that, both from
Yeah.
a, both from a sexy perspective and from a food perspective.
Yeah. 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 But my other two nonfiction books weren't about word origins. If I can just quickly mention them, one came out in 1999, and you'll see why in a second, because it was about how people at the ends of previous centuries celebrated or wrote about the ends of their centuries. And when I got this idea, I thought, oh, this is great. I can go way, way back centuries and centuries. But what I discovered was I certainly could do that for 1899, 1799, 1699 to a little bit of an extent, but 1599 and earlier, people didn't count time in the same way. Like it was 1599, and that was known, but it would be more common to say, instead of saying 1599 or 1560, they'd say, well, that was the 12th year of the reign of Queen Elizabeth or something like that. They did it according to monarchs. So they didn't have the same sense of, the odometer changing over to a new century. But for the previous 3 centuries they did. And some of the parallels were quite astonishingly, like you recall that in 1999, there was a lot of concern about Y2K, that computers were going to go haywire because of some glitch or something like that. Well, at the end of the 19th century, they also had a very dystopian, or they had a fear that what was happening to humans was that we were devolving, because of course Charles Darwin had was writing not long before that, so people were familiar with the idea of evolution. And then it occurred to people, well, we're no longer, or a lot of people are no longer out in working on farms and using their muscles. They're sitting, at accountant's desks or a banking table or things like that. So they reasoned that we were going to start to lose the strength of our body. Some said that our little toes were going to begin to vanish, that we would become stooped. So yeah, there was a great fear of devolution, or devolution as they called it back then. And then with the earlier, like 1799, there were in Europe, there were religious concerns that some apocalyptic, biblically apocalyptic event was going to happen. So there's, when at the ends of those centuries, there's always sort of the looking back or looking forward with fear, or looking forward with great optimism and believing that we're going to solve all of our problems in the coming century. And those are a lot of fun to look at those predictions as well. Like 1899, of course, the Wright brothers hadn't yet flown an airplane. And so it didn't really occur to people to think about airplanes. And instead, they said that flight was going to become very, very common, but it was all going to be based on hot air balloons or hydrogen balloons, which to some extent became the case. We all know about the Hindenburg and Zeppelins like that. And I think what I learned, one of the things I learned from researching and writing that book, is that we obviously can't predict the future, but when we try to extrapolate from our level of technology into the future, we always get it wrong, because we can't be aware of the actual forces or the actual new technologies that are going to arise and have an impact on our society. So, people who predict what life is going to be like in 2050, they're doing so at their own peril, because they're going to be wrong. I'm pretty sure.
Now, the book that you're talking about now is called The End. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. The End, closing words for a millennium. Because, of course, 1999 was not just the end of the century, but also the end of the millennium. And, I also realized that there was a big argument at the end of those 3 centuries about what was the actual end. Was it December 31st, 1899, or was it December 31st, 1900? And there's arguments to be made for both. That controversy emerged in 1899, 1799, 1699. Yeah.
Consistency.
And 1999. Pardon me?
Consistency.
Yes. Yeah, humans are consistent.
Yeah. Generational consistency. You mentioned an apocalypse. So your last book is Headmasters.
The Headmasters. Yeah.
So did part of that book evolve because of your research into the end of the centuries and what people thought from a dystopian perspective, or did it just happen?
I never thought of that, but it would make sense, I think, because what the apocalyptic perspectives that people had at the end of those centuries, I'm sure they must have affected my sense of the future. But at the same time, I've always, even when I was a kid, I liked stories that were, dystopian or post-apocalyptic, as it's probably now more commonly called. One of the earliest, of course, isn't Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, but she wrote another novel called The Last Man, which was about the last person living on Earth after a pandemic killed everybody else. So the idea of post-apocalyptic goes back, a couple hundred years. So in mine, it's post-apocalyptic because some technological disaster has occurred. I never explicitly explain what it is. It's just sort of referred to. And it's resulted in the apparent destruction of all of humanity except for the people in this very small community in Northern Ontario, the Canadian Shield. They called it Blue Ring. It was a research facility, and they survived for reasons I won't get into. And at the same time, what also happened at that moment was these creatures, and I tend to think of them as kind of plate-sized wood ticks. I grew up in the prairies. I hate wood ticks. They get on your body and they latch onto you, and like vampires, they suck blood out of you. I just hate them. And so when I started to write the novel, I thought, what's the most horrible thing I can imagine? And it was like a really big wood tick. And so these creatures appeared, and they attached themselves to the backs of humans, and they put their little coils into your head, and they control you. They control the humans they're on for about 18 hours a day. And then there's about 6 hours a day when they kind of go to sleep, and humans have their own their wills back to some extent. That's the basic premise of the Headmasters. Yeah.
There's one other book we haven't talked about, and I've saved it for last because it's one that I kind of find interesting. It's Cooking with Shakespeare.
Yeah, that's again, food. I've always been interested in food. I like to cook. And by chance, when I was doing my PhD, I became friends and colleagues with another graduate student who eventually went on to become a chef, work in restaurants, and a food writer. And we both ended up living in Kitchener-Waterloo. That's where, well, actually, I'm not in Kitchener-Waterloo right now. I'm about an hour away from there. And so I approached him and said, hey, why don't we write a book? And again, I had been approached by the publisher in the UK to write this, but I knew that I needed somebody with actual food and cooking, like professional experience. So I approached my friend Andrew, and we wrote it together. It was a lot of fun. I did the research into the cultural side of things, and he did research and testing of the 200 or so recipes that we include in the book. So we do have actual recipes. We include them in the original, one might be tempted to call it Old English. It's not Old English. It's not even Middle English. Middle English was Chaucer. Shakespeare actually wrote in early modern English. But we include those versions, and then we include versions that have been modernized by Andrew. So, for example, there's a recipe that is for sparrow pie. Well, we didn't go out and catch a bunch of sparrows, and so Andrew instead substituted something like squab or something, some small fowl like that. Some of the recipes we couldn't substitute. Like there was one for roast peacock, and it was extremely elaborate. Like the peacock was cooked, and then I think a chicken was put inside of it, and then a turtle was put inside the chicken. This is called engastration. The Romans used to do it as well, and even now there's something called turducken. Have you heard of that? Turducken
Absolutely.
is a turkey with a duck and a chicken stuffed into each other.
Common down in Louisiana.
Yes, yeah. I think they are often deep fried down there. So this peacock had these other creatures put into it, and then the skin and feathers were put back onto it. A wire was used to hold up its head, and then they put gunpowder into its beak and lit it as it was coming to the table, so it seemed to be spewing fire like a dragon. Well, we didn't try that one. But
so
yeah.
Peacock Jubilee. So Peacock Jubilee.
Yes, that's right. But some of the recipes were really quite good. Like I still make some of them. Like one of them was boiled chicken, which we don't often just boil chickens, but the recipe called for boiling a whole chicken, but stuffing it full of asparagus while it is boiling, and then adding a lot, like way more mace than you would think any recipe could handle. And it was quite good. It's very, very moist, but flavorful. The asparagus was really good. Some of their recipes for desserts were really good. I mean, they're quite similar to our desserts, like custard, for example, different kinds of pies. That hasn't changed a lot. But some of the practices have changed a lot. Like lobster, for example. Lobster, I think, is still considered one of the, a very shishy kind of food. But back then, only the poor people ate lobster because it was considered basically like a sea bug. And there were things like deer. Deer were eaten by everybody, but strictly speaking, deer were not supposed to be hunted by anybody but the king and the aristocracy because they existed on the king's land. And so if you killed a deer, if you went hunting for a deer and killed one, that was considered poaching, and it had very serious consequences. So yeah, as the French say, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because there's still lots of things that have not changed from that time, but some things have. I'll give you one more example. You know how nowadays we talk about blue collar individuals or blue collar jobs? Well, that goes back to Shakespeare's time, because if you were a servant, you had to wear something called livery, and livery was blue. It indicated that you were a servant, and that has continued up to the present day, where still typically, if you have somebody come over to fix your furnace or something like that, chances are that they will have a blue shirt on, a blue collar. So yeah, what I love about culture and about words is that there is this hidden depth behind them or beneath them that we're often not aware of, and discovering those depths, I just think is one of the greatest things in the world.
Hidden depths. So in other words, if I was looking for early modern Klingon literature, and I understand there's a couple of Shakespeare plays that have actually been translated into Klingon.
Yep, that's right. Hamlet and The Tempest, I think. Yeah,
I think you're right. Yeah. So it's interesting, even though we laugh about it and it's a non-existent thing, it exists in our society.
Yeah. And Shakespeare has been translated into so many languages, of course. I mean, I can understand French pretty well, and I studied Latin and Arabic. I don't speak Arabic well enough to probably go to a play and understand it. But when I studied Anglo-Saxon as well, but I wish I was really, really fluent in another language and could attend a production of Shakespeare and hear it in another language. I think that would be so cool. And partly I'm thinking that because just last night, my wife and I'm actually in near a small city called Stratford right now, Stratford in Ontario, named after the Stratford in England, of course. And about 60 years ago, someone established the Stratford Shakespeare Festival, which has become an internationally renowned festival. They don't just put on productions of Shakespeare. I mean, there's always some of his plays produced. But last night we went to La Cage aux Folles, and before that the night before that we went to another musical. I forgot. It was amazing. So I forget how I got onto that. You get me talking, and I get on so many digressions that I lose track.
You have a lot of different kinds of books, a lot of different areas. How do people find you? How do they buy your books? How can you help them? Tell us a little bit about that, and we'll get ready to wrap up the show.
Sure, yeah. Well, probably the easiest way online is just go to markmorton.ca. It's CA because I'm Canadian, as I mentioned, so it's not com. So markmorton.com. Morton, I'll give you a quick etymology of that name, because almost all names also have origins or etymologies. Morton literally means the town in the moors. The moors are the kind of swampy parts in England. So my ancestors were from the swampy parts, or swampy town in England. Mark, of course, means comes from Mars, the god of war. Although I'm Mennonite, so we are pacifists, so that's a little bit ironic. So yeah, markmorton.ca has all of my books there and links to other things too that are relevant to me.
What kind of audience would be looking for your books?
Well, I mean, my latest one, the novel, it's actually a young adult novel, young adult dystopian novel. And it's been getting great reviews. And I do think that people, young people and older people who like things like The Hunger Games or The Maze Runner, things like that, I think that they would enjoy The Headmasters. And then, anybody who enjoys food and cooking and gastronomy, they would enjoy Cupboard Love. And then, of course, there's also the Lover's Tongue, the one about sex and love words, which, when it was published in the UK, the publisher there actually changed the title without even telling me. It changed the title to Dirty Words. They know their market better. It's the land of Benny Hill, so but they didn't even tell me. And the one about the ends of centuries. I think we need to wait another, 76 years before that one's going to be in vogue again.
Well, Mark, it's been lovely talking with you. I really, truly enjoyed it. Learned a lot. And especially when the dog runs away for 4 days, I'll have to keep that one in mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Red. It was delightful.
And with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude our Wise One shows today on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. Very shortly, very shortly, 20 minutes, I'll be doing Talking Heads on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. And I'll be continuing down the road on, I think we're going to wrap up minerals. We're talking about nutrition, a deep dive into nutrition. What do you really need to know about various parts, foods, supplements, things that we eat that can help us or hurt us, depending on how little or how much we get. So please join me on Talking Heads on the USA Global TV and Radio Network on the hour, which it will be 1 o'clock here in the Houston area PM timeframe. And look forward to seeing you next week on the Wise Ones on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. Take care, y'all. Bye now.